So there are some documents that have been declassified about the whole Russian collusion thing with Donald Trump, and I honestly think it would be really healing for people on all sides to really get a clear view of what happened in this story. And a big part of this is going to be this law firm, Perkins Coie. This is a huge law firm out of Seattle. They represent these big tech companies, and they were the law firm for the Hillary Clinton campaign and for the Democratic National Convention. And it turns out that they hired people to build this Trump-Russia dossier that was ultimately called the Steele dossier. And that's going to be important that the attorneys are the ones that hired this company, specifically this guy, Mark Elias. We're going to see more about him. This is him. This is Mark Elias. He's a longtime sort of political attorney. And it's really important that Hillary Clinton's campaign is the one that funded the Trump dossier, as you're going to see, because this is really where I think we start to see, honestly, the beginning of lawfare and the weaponization of so many parts of our government that are supposed to be neutral. Which is why you see things like Kash Patel, the current head of the FBI, saying the FBI will not be weaponized anymore. I hope so. Because this whole vibe that was created by this Russia hoax during the 2016 election has led to so much use of our government being involved in politics in ways that it's not supposed to be. Like, for example, Trump was found guilty in this case where basically this guy, Alvin Bragg, which we're going to learn about here in a second, he found a way to combine a bunch of misdemeanors into a felony. He escalated them up into a felony, which officially makes Donald Trump a felon. And you can see that that just completely soiled Donald Trump's reputation with so many people. And for people who maybe aren't like you and me and don't pay a lot of attention to the news, they just hear things like felony, Russia, intelligence, and then they just have a bad view of the presidency and the president because of these basically lawfare motions. Here's Alvin Bragg here. It's that guy. He campaigned literally saying that I'm the guy who has experience with Donald Trump and I'm going to hold him accountable. That's not what a person who is trying to run to be the head lawyer for an area is supposed to say. I mean, they're not supposed to say that I'm going to hunt after a particular person. That is exactly the use of the law in an improper way. And now he's even right now campaigning saying that I took on Trump, and he's using that to try to campaign for his second term. And this whole thing that started because of this Trump-Russia stuff that ended up being a total hoax has led to these things about James Comey, Letitia James, and honestly so many more. Which is one of the main reasons I really wanted to just understand the actual facts of what happened in this case. Because even me, somebody who pays attention to politics, I wasn't totally settled on how I felt about Donald Trump and his relationship with Russia and Vladimir Putin, but now I am, and I hope you will be too after a couple minutes here. So this is a report from a Senate committee that investigated this. And so what it found is that in July of 2016, which is going to be an important date, Hillary Clinton approved a plan to stir up a scandal against Donald Trump to tie him to Putin and the Russians. And it's also pretty important. Obama hasn't really been looped into this too much yet, but the CIA director John Brennan briefed President Obama, we know this because of his own handwritten notes, and told Obama that Hillary Clinton is trying to stir up a campaign that will claim interference by Russian security services in the election. Now, that's kind of important because that means that Barack Obama heard from his head of the CIA that there was a presidential candidate, which happened to be on Obama's side of the political spectrum, who was probably doing something illegal. Here's John Brennan right here. So it's important that in September of that year, U.S. intelligence officials forward an investigative referral to James Comey and the director of counterintelligence saying that Hillary Clinton is up to some shady stuff. So the FBI knows at this point that Hillary Clinton is trying to stir up basically a hoax to discredit Donald Trump. It's also important to note that around this same time, Hillary Clinton's email scandal was in full swing. So she had a lot of motivation to distract from that. And the DNC and Hillary Clinton also violated campaign finance laws because they paid almost $1 million to Perkins Coie, and they said it was for legal and compliance consulting. That's what they said in their official filings. And so in this complaint, the DNC actually has paid a fine where they have paid a civil penalty to the commission because they misstated the purpose of disbursement, because it would not be proper for the Clinton campaign to fund opposition research that was used by the FBI, because that would be the government getting involved in an election, right? And they knew that, which is why they didn't correctly identify this huge payment to Perkins Coie, which this guy, Mark Elias, used to pay somebody to build this Trump dossier, the Steele dossier. And I like this stuff because I like knowing how the actual stuff works behind the scenes. And this guy, Mark Elias, was known to be somebody who was effective at hiding political funding for things that maybe it's not supposed to be used for. And interestingly enough, recently, he actually joined the Black Lives Matter crew going on board with BLM just last month. Anyway, so Elias contracts out this work to this guy, Steele. It's this guy, Christopher Steele. He used to work for British intelligence. So Hillary Clinton's money funneled through this Perkins Coie law firm, hires this guy, Christopher Steele, and then he doesn't even really do any actual work on it. He uses subcontractors that he contracts from his office in London. And this is going to get pretty interesting. So the main guy that was his source was this guy, Igor Danchenko. And I found Homie's LinkedIn profile. This is the dude. So Danchenko is the guy who basically puts all of the most incriminating evidence, so-called, forward to Christopher Steele, but he wasn't even in Russia. He was working at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. So basically, he took money and then floated it to people in Russia and say, hey, does anybody got any dirt for me? Because I could sure use some. And then this guy, knowing that they don't really want an honest report, what they want is something to smear Donald Trump, says, we've got it. And the FBI knew that Danchenko was not a credible source. They had actually investigated him for espionage charges from 2009 to 2011. And actually, one of the main sources for Danchenko was this guy, Charles Dolan. So this is an American guy who, again, was not in Russia. And Dolan basically says, I've got some serious dirt. Well, Dolan is totally compromised. He is a Democratic operative who has worked on the presidential campaign of every Democratic candidate since Jimmy Carter. So at this point, everybody involved knows that this Trump dossier thing is a total sham. But then Christopher Steele needs to prove that there was actual technical details behind the collusion. So then he says, oh, we've actually got details that show that Trump was working with this Russian bank. So these anonymous, literally anonymous cybersecurity firms say the logs suggest that Trump and Alpha configured something like a digital hotline connecting the two entities. And then all the people on Team Hillary start floating this academic-style white paper, but none of the authors or any of the documents were identified. It turns out that these supposed records were just automated spam marketing traffic, and that they said they found an email that was trump-email.com, and that was where the communications were happening. And then this Perkins Coie law firm comes back into it because this guy, Michael Sussman, he had actually been involved in the federal government, working for the federal government, and then started working for Perkins Coie. And he goes and makes false statements to the FBI General Counsel, James Baker. He arranged a meeting to share this bogus data with them and say, you should investigate this because here is the sort of smoking gun between the Trump organization and Alpha Bank, even though it was literally just spam traffic. And I wanted to share this story with you because, like I said, so many of us heard, for example, through the New York Times, like, oh my gosh, maybe there's a connection between Trump and Russian intelligence. So many people in our country believe this. Here's the New York Magazine saying that when Trump meets with Putin, he was probably meeting his handler, when it was entirely just a huge hoax orchestrated by Hillary Clinton. And furthermore, that Hillary Clinton was never really investigated for this very much. When presented with the Clinton plan evidence, which we know from handwritten notes from John Brennan were sent to President Obama, the government moved with extreme caution. Oh, wow. But because of these corrupt people that were involved with the Democrat side of things and the government, they took it really seriously when spam marketing traffic was associated with a domain called trump-email.com. And there's an old saying, you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. So if they're going to fight like that, that's the way it's going to be fought. And that's how we got to where we are.